right.
Good afternoon.
The meeting is now live streaming.
All right. All right. Well, Janine, we're ready.
Andrea, yes, the meeting is now live streaming.
We are ready.
Excellent. All right. Cuyahoga County Council Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, March 31st is now called to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Good afternoon, everyone. Calling the roll, Ms. Conwell. Ms. Conwell is absent at the moment. Ms. Brown.
I am here.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Ms. Stevens.
Present.
Ms. Simon.
Here.
Ms. Baker.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Sweeney.
Present.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher is absent at the moment. Mr. Schron.
Here.
And Council President Jones.
Here.
You have a
All right.
quorum.
Thank you now. Has anyone signed in from public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no public comment was submitted.
All right. Well, we have one item to discuss in this committee today, the establishment of a division of public utilities. So, Madam Clerk, would you again read this ordinance into the record?
Yes, ordinance 2021-0003, amending section 202.04 of the Cuyahoga County Code to establish a division of public utilities within the Department of Public Works.
All right, thank you. So at this time, I'm going to ask Mike Foley if you would come forward and give us a brief overview. Take us back to the beginning. Give us just a brief overview of where we are, and then after your presentation, we will have questions by our colleagues.
Okay, thanks, Council President Jones. Mike Foley from the Department of Sustainability. And just want to mention who else we've got on the call with us. We've got Ali Ahmed from Green Strategies, Andy Thomas and Mark Henning from Cleveland State University, Michael Jeans from Growth Opportunities Partners, who's working on a local green bank who may sees opportunities for the utility. Mike Weiss, who helped develop the original Brooklyn project, the landfill project. So just ask his folks to be on call in case there's any other questions. Basically, this is just walking through, we met with you about a month ago, 3 weeks, a month ago, walking through creation of a county utility. Under the state law, we think we've got the legal authority to develop county utility powers. This project would create a county utility under the Public Works Department to put together microgrid projects. We like this idea of microgrid projects. We think we can be able to brag about or sell ourselves as having resilient, clean, affordable electricity that we can use as both helping local businesses that exist here, but also use it as an economic development attractor. So we went through a presentation 3 or 4 weeks ago. There's a lot of, I think there's questions that you still had, so I think we're just available to answer questions as you see fit.
All right, Mike, thank you. I'll start off with the first question. Mike, when do we anticipate releasing the RFP for a vendor to operate this microgrid?
Yeah, so the goal would be to do something by, it depends on when we get passage, obviously, so of the legal authority. But the goal would be to get an RFP out for a developer to finance, build out and operate the microgrid, to get that RFP out to the public by the end of the year, maybe give ourselves a month or two wiggle room, but early next year at the latest. So first quarter of 2022 at the latest.
At this time, let me open it up to my colleagues. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Schron.
Yeah, this is obviously a new path for us. So we've had a lot of lawyers on the phone call. When are we going to hear the opposite side of this so we can hear the negatives and concerns? And when are we going to hear about others who had startup problems, insurance issues, whether or not there's any problems with disconnects, and if anybody has had a failure demand based on any of this? I'd love to hear both sides, all sides of the equation. We've only seemed to have heard one side of it.
Well, you're asking me that?
There can't only be just good news. So at least just a quick research tells you that there are other concerns out there. So I'd like to hear what those are.
Yeah, so I think and we were given a list of questions from council that we were asked to answer. So what's the liability if someone doesn't pay, if they sign up to the microgrid and doesn't pay their bill? What's the liability if the developer doesn't perform, right? So those are legitimate questions, and those are kind of legal contracting questions that we're going to have to, which is one of the reasons why we want some good attorneying or lawyering up front to help make sure we've got those contracts in place, right? What's the liability of the county to being, you know, in one sense, we're the vehicle for a developer to sell electricity to a customer. So what's our liability around that? And we, you know, in one sense, we've got a little bit of experience in this. When we developed the Brooklyn project, we did it. It was a three-way power purchase agreement between the developer of the project, Cleveland Public Power as the distribution utility, and the county as the customer of the power. And Cleveland was very, concerned about those questions and made sure that they, in this contract that they have with the three parts of us, that, if there's a default, that CPP as the distribution utility is not in the middle of that the developer who's developing the power and selling the power and operating the microgrid goes after the customer. So that's what we've got kind of precedent for, that we would endeavor to write our contracts the same way. And that's why we need some good lawyering up front. In terms of other people having concerns or questions outside of, we're presenting you with an idea that we think is logical and works. I think these are public discussions, and other people can come forward and raise concerns if they see fit, I guess. I haven't heard of any, after our last conversation, I got a lot of phone calls, and I'm sure other people did too, from people saying to us, hey, this is a great idea. But I'd like to be the, we may want to be the developer on this. We may want to be an operator on this, things like that. So I haven't heard a lot of people yelling at us saying, what the heck are you doing?
So you're saying that there's no problems for us as the provider of this, because unlike your analysis of the solar panels, the supplier was still CPP, at least as I would have understood it. We just happen to be a provider of energy to CPP, were we not?
No, we're the customer. So the supplier is IGS Solar, and then CPP is the distributor of it. Okay, so the power goes from the IGS Solar, the solar farm, through CPP to the county.
Will we be the provider here in this case?
No, we'll be in the middle. So someone else will be building the solar fields to generate the electricity. There will be a tap into the transmission grid. That will all be on the developer side. So those costs will all be on the developer side. We won't have any of those capital costs for any of that construction. What we do is provide the vehicle for those to be built and then sent along wires to the customer. So the legal relationship, there will be a three kind of party legal relationship, but based on our, how we developed with the CPP, the Brooklyn project, that if there's defaults, it'll be between the developer and the customer, not us.
So there'd be a power drop.
If I'm messing anything up here, let me know. But that's the intention of how we're going to write these contracts. If
a critical user who is depending upon this perhaps to store embryos and that power drop causes because it's coming through this microgrid to have lost those. You're saying that we have no connection and we're not going to get sued for liability on this regards to this. Is that what all the attorneys are saying on this?
Let me jump in here. I don't think I would ever say we're not going to get sued. You just can't say that. But the reality of it is, the goal here is to dump all of the liability onto the developer here. But that doesn't mean we won't get sued.
Okay. I'm just trying to go and find out. There's what, about 500 of these things across the country right now, Mike?
Not districts like we're envisioning. So there's behind the meter microgrids, you know, Air Force bases or college campuses or kind of, you know, behind like one customer. There's nothing like it's kind of with multi-customers.
How many are like this in the country right now?
Microgrids? Andy, do you have an answer on that?
I'd say there's probably 2 or 3 like this.
In the entire country?
Right.
Oh, okay. So we are going to be the 4th potential one in the country?
You know, operationally, it's not that much different. But it's contractually different and regulatorily different. So yes, there's just, it'll be, we have to be careful with our contracting to make sure that we have everything set up to push all the liability and the warranties onto to the developer. And utilities, by the way, never warrant anything. They never warrant uptime.
I got that. Yeah. But the difference between that is we're professing, I think, and everything I've heard is we're professing to be at that 99+%, which utilities do not do that. But you can buy insurance clearly for that warranty.
Right. And you can also limit your liability. I mean, that's what NG does at Ohio State. They provide a 5.9 warranty, uptime warranty,
right?
But it's limited. You know, it's not like an endless warranty. So if if the lab goes out at Ohio State killing a bunch of projects, biological projects, it's not going to be multi-million-dollar liability.
They'll have a fence around with a deductible, I'm sure, or something of that nature. What are the other two? What are the other 2 or 3, Andy? Where are they located?
So there's one in Philadelphia where it's based at the Navy base in Philadelphia, and they operate out to some of the local businesses there. And there's one in Brooklyn, I believe it is. And then the third one, I can't remember right now where it is.
Okay.
But the model we've been looking at most closely is the Philadelphia model. We've been talking to those folks about how they do theirs.
Okay. And we could,
Thomas,
has there been a write-up on that at all, any place where you have the data of what they experienced and what their concerns were and successes and failures?
I can see if I can find some, I'm not sure if they published anything on that, but I can see what I can find and we can send it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Strawn. Mr. Thomas, tell me a little more about the developer, those that we would, the vendor that we would be seeking through RFP. Tell me the sense of their size, their ability. Are they, who are the vendors that would potentially be bidding? Are these $1 million companies, $1 billion companies? Give me a sense of who we are bringing into this community.
So I think I'm going to defer to Ali to answer that question, but I will say that the responses we got from the downtown Cleveland microgrid were Fortune 500 companies. These will have these will be somewhat smaller than the one we did for downtown, so might not be as large, but Ali, I think, can answer that question better.
Yeah, I think when you look at the developer, you really end up with a development team in some cases. In some cases, you end up with a single entity. The single entities that are able to provide the technical, the operational, the design, as well as the financing tend to be extremely large multinational companies. Some of the ones that I think we've mentioned before, the one that is doing Ohio State is NG. There's another one known that's called Enel. And there's even a division of AEP, who's based in the Cincinnati utility company. There's a division of them that would have the ability to do that in whole. Other groups tend to partner, and they tend to have a technical side and then a financing side. And the financing companies that they work with are also extremely large funds that do a lot of public-private partnership projects. I know we spoke to one that is partnered with Schneider Electric. Schneider is multi-billion-dollar global company, and they partner with financiers who do everything from toll roads to bridges to other types of public works, public-private partnership projects. So.
Okay, so if you bring in a company like this, to Councilman Sean's question about the downsides or the potential liabilities, if this company comes in, are they taking the liability for any cost issues or shortfalls or any challenges? Are they taking full liability, or does it come back on the county at some point?
I think it's hard to define, and Greg, I'm sure will hop in. I'm not a lawyer. Let me preface with that. But I have done a number of these kinds of power purchase contracts and energy service agreement contracts. It's hard to define liability as a single monolith here. I think there's lots of different parts of liability. So for example, if you look at construction liability, so that's building out the physical assets that are required, the developer tends to take all of that liability. If you look at financing liability, the ability to get the money to pay to do the things, the developer tends to take all the liability for that. It's hard to say that there's zero liability to the county, but the goal in any contract would be to push as much of that liability as possible to the developer, and then also to share that with the end customer by having, as Mike suggested, this three-pronged contract between the developer as the person that's putting in the money, building it, owning and operating, the county, which in this case is acting as the distribution utility, and then the customer who is consuming the power. And really the county is the vehicle, but most of the contractual arrangements of liabilities are really between the developer and the customer.
Okay, so as I still try to fully understand this project, when I say liability, and you mentioned there are many aspects of it, let's assume that the developer is taking all the financial costs of building and the infrastructure that's needed to be that needs to be established. What about in the context of power needing to be shut off or turned on? If a moment comes when it needs to be turned off, is this a manual thing, just like cable company will turn off your power and turn it back on when you pay them? Is it automatic? Will there be guardrails against the elected officials, whereas we get calls and say, we need you to turn it on, or Councilman, don't turn my power off? Will there be guardrails, and can there be guardrails in that type of scenario? And then on the other side again, if the power goes out, who is liable for not delivering power?
It's a little hard, so apologies for the quizzical look on my face, because again, we haven't written these contracts yet.
Okay.
The goal would be to push those specific elements that you described. The goal in the contracting, the three-party contracting, will be to push all of those responsibilities to the developer. So if there is a non-payment by the customer, that the developer will be responsible for all of that process. So notifying the customer that they haven't paid, assessing any late fees, and then taking the action to physically shut off the customer, which is a physical action that occurs. They have to send somebody to the site and turn off the power. Could the customer call the county? Yes, of course they could. And could the county, work in that three-party mechanism to support the customer in a special instance? Of course they could. I think it just depends on how the contract is written, and then what action the county would want to take in a scenario like that.
So,
Yes, I think-
is there a question from committee?
No.
So let me ask just one more question then, as my colleagues continue to reflect. When you mention how the contract is written, who does that? What legal counsel do you need to actually draft the contract that we would have with the developer?
Yeah, Councilman, this is Greg. Once this is approved, I'll sit down with the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's got the jurisdiction over engaging outside counsel for the county. So I'll sit down with the prosecutor and probably Dave Lambert, the head of his civil section, walk him through what it is we need, and then I assume we're going to jointly develop a request for qualifications, hopefully within the next 2 months or so after this is approved, and we'll put that out there, and we'll identify a firm for that kind of a process.
So that is obviously we know the prosecutor's role for providing the county with our legal services. But the actual creation of this contract that answers many of the questions we've just started to ask, who provides that for us, and how will you make that determination? Again, who will actually draft the contract that will guide the county and the developer?
Well, that would be the attorney that we select with the help of the prosecutor's office.
Oh, okay.
The law firm that we
Yeah, and
select.
we're going to need some engineering assistance. So these are consultants. They're going to help us with this first tranche of our documents we're going to need to send out for the RFP.
Okay, are there any questions from the committee?
Mr.
Council President?
Yes.
Council President, I would like the record to reflect that Council members Gallagher and Conwell have joined the meeting.
All right, well, we will let Councilman Gallagher have the floor.
Thank you. I'm sorry to be tardy. Did I hear that there are 3 of these in the United States of America?
3 in in front of the meter microgrids. So there's many microgrids on college bases or,
No, what you're doing here, there's 3 of these?
District-wide, yeah.
Okay.
2
So
to 3, I think. Mike, I thought we heard 2 to 3. We haven't heard 3 yet.
Well, shouldn't we, if this is such a great idea, shouldn't the world know about this? And shouldn't we have 3 contracts to review? And shouldn't we do more legal analysis rather than say, I think, I kinda? And let's start at the beginning. Let's start at all responsibility goes away from the county and to the developer. You completely indemnify the county. Why would we get involved in something that clearly, as you know, utilities go, they're going to have nothing but problems? And finally, you're putting this on a county that can't even establish an ERP system. We're talking about some intricate things here, and a lot of maybe we'll hire engineering, and we maybe we'll hire an attorney to help us write the contract. I don't know how many attorneys we have, but we're going to have to hire an attorney to do this. Yet we don't have those legal documents from the other 2 or 3 places that this is in place. And what's my guess? If the Naval Academy has one, the federal government footed that bill. So shouldn't we know that? So I'm just saying there's a lot of questions here that need to be answered. Thank you.
Any further questions?
Chair, if I may, Nan Baker.
Councilwoman Baker?
Thank you. And yes, I told Mike that I was open-minded to this. It sounds like in a perfect world, this can be an asset and benefit to Cuyahoga County and attract businesses that perhaps would come here because we have something unique to offer to support their electricity in case there were blackouts or weather-driven problems. But I also think that, and I have asked in prior meetings, that we do look at the other side of the coin, that we have only gotten the good news about what microgrids can bring to our county. But I don't think we've talked enough about what these others have done and how they've done it and what the downside was for them to establish. And I think that the questions that our staff put together are really important questions. And I would like to see them answered before we negotiate anything with putting any contracts together. And we really should know that if the power fails, who's responsible? Absolute. And are there any other costs beyond the proposed director of utility, which is part of this agreement that we would hire someone to work in the Public Works Department? I just think that there are some unanswered questions that I don't want to go into a contract hoping to push everything off on the developer. We need to know that it is going to be pushed off on the developer. And I would like to see the contracts that the others have also engaged in, if there's only 3 or 4 others in the entire country. That's where I'm at. I'm trying to stay open-minded, but I do think that this is a unique opportunity, but also a unique challenge that we as a county, especially at this point in what we're doing with other challenges that we have, I'm not sure that we're prepared at this point to take on more responsibility. The one question, though, that I'm curious about, how would the power be generated? Are we going to be generating it by clean energy, like from solar and wind? How exactly does that power get reinforced to be a backup to the larger energy grid, electric grid?
Well, I'll let Ali jump in here in a second, but we'll have both local generation through land. We've got a lot of closed and capped landfills in this county, where just like we did with the Brooklyn project, we were able to put 35,000 solar panels on it and are running electricity into county buildings. So there's things like that.
Is it how it's proposed to using solar and wind?
That would be one source of the generation, right? So there would be there's significant battery backup technologies now. So the power goes down and it's night out and we don't have any solar, that there would be batteries that would be able to keep the power on at the facility. But also we would tap into the larger transmission grid. So there's a transmission grid that goes throughout the whole country. There's 3 or 4 different regions throughout the country. We're in the PJM transmission grid. So we would be able to tap in to get electricity through that transmission grid as well. So Ali, I don't know if that's anything else I need to mention there, but there'd be different sources and different kind of protections for when the grid went down, between battery, local on-site generation, local solar generation on landfills, and then tapping in from the larger transmission grid.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I just echo what you say. I mean, it can encompass a variety of generation sources. And could include brown power sources as well, such as fuel cells or microturbines. I think the balance as you look to onboard every customer, each customer is its own development project, and you have to look at the needs, the space, the design for that individual customer. So a customer who maybe only needs a few hours of resiliency and is okay in a scenario where if there's a huge long-term outage, they're okay sending everybody home, then maybe that would suffice to be a battery. A customer that may want to even ride through those types of scenarios may need some additional generation sources besides solar and a battery. They may need a natural gas-fired fuel cell. They could even require some secondary backups with diesel or something else. So each solution is really tailored for the customer. I think that's part of the reason why we struggle for specifics here, is that each one is very, very customer centric. I would like to kind of correct the record a little bit too while I have the floor. I think we've talked about there being a limited number, and I think 3 is probably a low estimate on the number of in front of the meter microgrids. But understand that the technology that we're talking about and the type of implementation and the type of contracting that we're talking about has been done hundreds, if not thousands of times in the US and globally. You know, the kind of community scale microgrids where there's a lot of published data are very limited, but there are many of these microgrids out there and operations that operate similarly to microgrids. And there is also a lot of motion to standardize these power purchase agreements and energy service agreement contracting efforts. So, you know, we're not asking council here to step into a black hole. There's definitely a lot of literature, and we can provide more of that if people are interested in diving into that.
So President Jones, Mike
Yes.
Weiss here. Can I just make a comment?
Sure, go right ahead, Mr. Weiss.
Good to be with everybody. As Mike Foley mentioned, we were the developer on the Brooklyn project. I guess I'd like to echo Ali a little bit. You know, I'm really excited about what the county's considering here. I spent a lot of time down in Columbus, and I've worked on the House Bill 6 issue quite a bit. And I know Mrs. Baker, that you've spent quite a bit of time on that too. But you know, it's interesting that what's left of House Bill 6 is a subsidy for coal-fired generation, the elimination of Ohio's efficiency standard, and the scaling back of Ohio's portfolio standard. That's what's left of House Bill 6. And that may be what we're stuck with. And can you just imagine that? I mean, if somebody would have introduced a bill 2 years ago that eliminated the RPS, the efficiency standard, and did a subsidy for coal plants, would that have ever passed? But that's what's left of House Bill 6 right now. And there's not going to be any broad support for renewable energy out of Columbus. So I think it's wonderful that Cuyahoga County's looked at the landscape and said, what can we do to support an area that we just have to be a part of? And, you know, nobody's mentioned yet, but what excites me is the ability of the county to operate like a municipal electric system. And there's nothing new or forward pushing about it. We've got 80 of them in Ohio right now. Cuyahoga County would arguably or would be the largest, but these systems are running very well and they're providing great opportunities for their customers. And the only reason why we were able to do the Brooklyn Solar Project, which everybody says is fantastic, it got Project of the Year from a national publication. The only reason we were able to do it is because we did it with a muni, which was CPP. You know, so for the county to be able to partner with CPP and provide that type of opportunity throughout Cuyahoga County is wonderful. So anyway, I just had to say I'm so excited about what the county's thinking about doing, and certainly here to answer any specific questions. And I see Mr. Sweeney there. Potentially a question I would be happy to answer.
Mr. Weiss, I do appreciate that. But a few thoughts come to mind when you say that. One, we don't have any formal agreements with CPP right now. There was a submission with CPP that garnered some responses from developers. My one question on that was, when those developers responded, were they asked to take full liability then? Do we know? Can someone answer that?
Yeah. So we've gone through the RFQ phase just to predetermine who would be eligible. And one of the things we said is, you know, are you bondable? Are you insurable? Will you have insurance to cover costs if there's problems? And do you have the money to bring in your own capital to build out the project? And so of the 8 responses, all of them were large national, international energy firms who said, "Yep, we can do that. We would want to do that." We've drafted the RFP for that, and we've talked through before. We're at a holding pattern right now with Cleveland, but in that draft RFP is that verbiage basically. How will you make sure that we're all protected? So we've got the language, and it's the intent of that RFP, assuming we're able to get it out. But obviously we haven't been able to do that RFP yet.
So at this moment, there is no formal working agreement with Cleveland Public Power. So if we go it alone, is that an option? If Cleveland Public Power never in the next year, 5, 10, 20 years ever gets on board, can we go it alone?
We can go it alone outside the city of Cleveland. So that's where these first sets of projects we've talked to you about are located. Other than the one that we talked about with the Cleveland Foundation, which would be what's called a behind the meter potential project. So it's that innovation district in Cleveland. But the ones that where we would be in front of the meter, right, is are projects we can go alone on. I'm sorry.
President?
Mr. Sweeney, do I see your hand? Go right ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President, and to all the presenters and my colleagues. There's a whole bunch of questions, and we're asking them right now, but just the question before us right now is, as the clerk read the legislation, it's just about forming a utility for Cuyahoga County. That's all we're doing right now. If I could be so bold to ask about the legislation, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President, to Mr. Foley.
Yeah, Councilman Sweeney said this is just to give us the legal authority to then issue RFPs, RFQs for future development. So any of those other development projects, we would have to come back in front of council for authority to move forward on the individual projects. But this just gives us legal authority to start the ball rolling.
And Mr. President, to the director, do you believe it's going to withstand any legal challenges? Because you said in the very beginning, I think we have, and to Mr. Gallagher's point, we won't be moving forward if someone challenges it. You think we're going to win in court?
Yeah, yes, Councilman. We've got solid legal opinions from both our law department and the Legislative Service Commission from the state of Ohio.
Perfect. And Mr. President, I just don't like passing laws that could be challenged and overturned. So so everything that we just passed the legal authority to give it to you in the near future, or whenever we do it, if we do it, every other component of it, we have to come back, and that's when all the questions can be asked. And it doesn't have to move forward if the council doesn't want it to move forward, but this is just the first step in regards to the process. And it's a long journey ahead of us with the council's involvement at every step of the way. Mr. President, to the director.
Right. Well, I hear your point, Councilman Sweeney. And to that, let me ask this. Do you need this legislation to release an RFP?
I think so. Yes, we do. I don't think anyone's going to bid on this unless they know we've got the legal authority to move forward.
Mr. President.
I have a follow-up. I have one more question, Mr. President.
Councilman Sweeney, you can ask your follow-up, and then Councilwoman Simon next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just with the president's couple trillion dollar infrastructure project, is there any funds dedicated to this microgrid or energy redundancy stuff? And if so, how would we go about asking for it? Because I mean, it's a ton of money, so hopefully it has some bearing on this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, and Councilman Simon, before you weigh in, let me just come back. Mike, you said you feel that the legislation needs to be in place before you can release an RFP. Greg, can you comment to that? Do we have the legal authority to release an RFP without legislation, or must legislation be in place first?
Well, I think the way to look at this is that I think arguably we could release an RFP for just about anything, but the point here is, would anybody respond if they don't see a mechanism for the county to move forward?
Mr. President, having worked with developers and responded to RFPs, the amount of work involved to put together a team and put together a proposal is pretty incredible. And I don't think you would get many responses if there was some question whether you had the authority to even go forward with the project.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, I'd like Mr. Foley to answer the question that I asked
Oh,
in regards to the dollars that might be coming from the federal government.
Yeah,
And I want to, if we have this passed, does it put us in a better position to ask for the money if there's any money there? Is my specific question.
President to Councilman Sweeney. Yeah, look, if we've got a utility, then there's out of the the $2 trillion or whatever it is that has been set aside for infrastructure, there's at least $100 million. I think the analysis I saw last night, and I haven't seen any of the analysis that came out today, but there's at least $100 billion available for electricity upgrades and for microgrids. So if that money, if we've got a utility, then that gives us an opportunity to apply for those funds. And if we don't, then we wouldn't have that ability.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you know, I'm a co-sponsor. I know it's all about economic development in my eyes, and that's why I'm pushing a little bit and look forward to getting all our questions answered, but I'm supportive as we move through this journey. Thank you.
Councilwoman Simon.
Thank you so much. It seems that there's some confusion about, and I'm glad Councilman Sweeney brought this up. All we're doing is establishing a utility, but that is a separate question that's being asked from council members about liability, and we're not even close to getting, an answer to those questions. We first, because it's for us to move forward with a realistic way to get bids, we need to establish utility. So there's no downside to establishing this structure in terms of this legislation, because Councilman Tron and Councilman Gallagher asked about downside. There's no downside to establishing this phase of this project. And it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of detail, but I'm not sure council appreciates the solar farm that we facilitated and how successful that is, and the technology that we're looking at with regard to a grid is there. We've got this every place, and this is just a different meter mechanism, I guess, behind the meter, in front of the meter, but it's not in how we're going to have the entities to which we'll be able to take advantage of this might be different, but the technology is there. And listen, in Ohio, and I'm glad Mike Weiss mentioned this, has gutted every portfolio, every standard. And we're going to be behind the 8 ball. When I hear, well, we're only 3rd or 4th. Well, you know what? Let's be 4th, because if we're not 4th, we're going to be last again. And frankly, I'm tired of sitting in Ohio being last. We have no investment, or we've just destroyed any kind of future investors coming into the state to be able to help us create the future way that we're going to fuel our economy. And it's not with fossil fuel, it's alternative means. And let's get ahead of this. And it's a unique opportunity to do this. And the only thing that's holding us back is to some degree of fear of being first. And I want to be first. And I don't think and this is different than ERP, by the way, because we're going to get the skilled experts to come in to help us instead of being, I'm not going to go into ERP, but this is going to be much different. So being 4th is a plus to me, and we're going to be able to take a lead in development. Councilman Sweeney mentioned that, but let's talk, I'm going to talk about economic development, marriage to combating, global climate change, which, let's be clear, that's really what we have to do to take our part and role to stop this. And we're going to, let's take advantage of this. So I am fully supportive of this. And I'm a co-sponsor. We need to move forward. We need to be leaders. And we've proven that we can do this in our solar farm. And I really have faith in these lawyers who are with us today and our background, who have been fully involved with this type of work for the last five years and plus more. I don't want to insult your experience. So, if we're afraid of what will happen if something doesn't go right, well, let's look at, what goes wrong with fossil fuel in Texas. So I don't want to open that door, but you know what, this is the future, and let's be the leader. Thank you for doing this, Mr. Foley and his team.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any further
Mr.
questions from the
President?
committee?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. President?
Councilman Gallagher.
I don't know, did you call me, sir?
Yes, I heard yourself and Miller, so Gallagher first and Councilman Miller.
I'm
second.
still awaiting the answer from Mr. Huth on the question. He was interrupted by Mr. Weiss.
I'm sorry, which question was that?
Does this need to move forward before the RFP?
Oh, I thought I did answer it. Technically, I think we can issue an RFP for anything, but I don't think anybody, as Mr. Weiss said, you're not going to get a response if people don't think that you can implement after the fact.
So is that what we normally do? Move legislation first and then do the RFP? I can remember of a few interesting things that didn't go that way.
I haven't been involved in anything quite as unique as this is, so I don't know how to answer that question.
Well, then that tells me that you've excused yourself from negotiating anything in here. I would say
if get to that conclusion,
if there's going to be movement on this forward, which I don't think we're nearly ready for, and certainly we wouldn't be first, keeping in mind the question I think that I have more than anything is having the developer take responsibility for all, indemnifying the county totally. That should be in this legislation up front. And if people wanting to come in under those terms, because eventually they will be under those terms. So why not do it now in the legislation, amend the legislation to clearly state Cuyahoga County is not going to take a loss in this, and it's all on the side of the developer. And if this is such a good idea, you're going to have hundreds of developers coming in here.
Mr. President, if I may, we're creating utility. We're not moving into detail on contracts, and there's no way even to take that approach. There's no reason for it. There's no downside to creating a utility.
Mr. President,
This doesn't expose us to liability, I guess, Mr. President. There's no exposure to liability by creating utility.
Mr. President, my only position on that is that eventually, if you don't do that, we're going to end up in another ERP type situation where we're going to eat everything. And you can shake your head all you want. We're eating a big dinner on the ERP, and this seems to be bigger, way bigger than that. So my concern would be the exposure of the county. Shouldn't any developer know in front what we want? And if anybody's scared of putting that in writing, then it tells me you don't have any faith in this program. That shouldn't scare anybody off, any legitimate person off from pursuing business with the county. It should be on them. And if it isn't, then Cuyahoga County taxpayers are at risk. And I think that's a huge risk. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but it seems reasonable to have some sort of security up front of where we stand. And maybe that's not where we stand. Maybe that's determined that we're not going to stand there and we're going to take all the responsibility. So just saying.
Mr. President.
Mr. Gallagher. Councilwoman
Mr.
Simon,
President.
would you like to make one final response, and then we'll go to Councilman Miller?
I just want to say that, no one's taking a stand that it's all or nothing. That's not what anybody's saying. What I think we're saying is at this point in the game, we need to, in order to move forward, create a structure And then when we get into the RP process, we'll be able as counsel to oversee the contracts, and every case is different. You know, any lawyer is going to tell you, you can't just say all or nothing at the outset of a structure, but at the time when we need to negotiate contracts, then there's an ability to weigh in and get a deal. And you're right, you know, we'll start to see what comes in. And frankly, we don't even need to take what comes in if we don't like it.
Right.
But we're not there yet. So let's get there, and then we could see what comes in. And I would disagree that this is like ERP, because we're going to have quite the expert team in place to be able to do this differently.
Thank you. Councilman Miller?
Yes, Mr. President and my colleagues, I would just like to echo what Ms. Simon and Mr. Sweeney had to say, that the world is going to be going in the direction of renewable energy, because it's going to have to do so to survive, and many businesses are going to have to go in the direction of more reliable energy, because they're going to have to do so to survive. So it's a question of both environmental survival and economic development, and I agree that we should move forward, and most of the RFPs that we've issued in the past, we already had the authority to act on them when we issued them. This is a different situation. In this case, we need enabling legislation, and I do believe that it makes sense to move forward. You just can't always anticipate everything before you take the first step, and I believe that success in this venture is going to depend on carefully structuring the contracts so that it's very clear where the responsibilities are. And if we're able to do that, we won't have the kind of problems we're having with the ERP system. It's an entirely different situation. So I would encourage us to take the first step, and it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not a large or costly step, and we retain the freedom to see what kind of results we get and which projects make sense to move forward on and which don't in the future. Thank you.
All right, Councilman Schron, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, Chairman. I mean, like my colleague, Mr. Gallagher, we're not going into this without the intention that ultimately this train, when it leaves the station, is going to go, the next stop will be a microgrid stop. So who's kidding themselves? We're not talking about opening up a power grid for the county to sell energy to compete with CPP as a regular energy provider. We're not talking about taking on the parts of the county to provide energy outside of that. So the only purpose is to create the 3, 4, or 5 microgrids that have been already identified. So to say that this train is not going in that direction is being naive, to not to at least to recognize that that's the purpose. It's not. So these are definitely linked together. So why not link it to the next stage? Because when I thought I heard Mr. Foley say that he was careful with his words that said that the insurance and the coverage and the agreement by all the people who are talking about this were willing to take on the risk of building and construction and the project and everything about that, but he did not talk about the full indemnity should there be a power loss. And I hate to bring up the sad aspects of that, of what happened at UH, but if that were to be the case, are they agreeing in their statement that they would indemnify this county for every potential penny of loss? Is that what you were, I didn't understand your comments on that, Mr. Foley.
That's, and Greg, you may want to jump in.
Construction loss, not construction loss, not power delivery, but total loss. If there was ever a drop in power that caused something to happen to their organization.
Yeah,
ultimately, yes, that's the position we're starting from, yes.
then let's put it in writing. I agree with Mr. Gallagher. Why? Because these are joined at the hip. This legislation, there's nothing that says that that we can amend this to say, and it is our intent that we are going to, the next phase is going to be a microgrid in which we're going to be soliciting RFPs where all parties would be indemnifying this county for all full responsibilities. What is the harm in being open and fair? We always talk about openness and complete disclosure. What's the harm of being completely disclosing that? That is the intent of where we're going with this legislation. Mr. Foley, do you have any problem with that?
I don't know. Suppose not. I want to give us, I'm trying to think about this. So what if we've got projects down in the future that we want to subsidize in some respects? Maybe there's, not these first sets of microgrids because the model is we want to do economic development and attraction, but maybe in 4 or 5 years, we want to do move into, we've got a region of the county that we really want to assist in some way, and we think we need to support it with some sort of subsidies. Would that prohibit that, I guess? So I don't know. Those are questions I think I'm probably okay saying, we want full indemnity. I don't know the legal issues around that, and maybe Greg, you understand this better, but it sounds okay to me.
Okay. Well, how many people, Mike, have you spoken to anybody in Philadelphia or in Brooklyn, the operating principles of this systems in those two locations where we've at least identified those are the only two that exist? There might be a third one. Have you spoken to any of the principles of any of the setting up, the background, the operation, the indemnities, all those kind of things? Have you spoken to any of the principles there, either or both of those?
Andy?
Mike, I can answer that. We have, Amoresco is the operator in Philadelphia. They built and operate that microgrid system. And they are one of the respondents to the downtown microgrid. And they are also talking to us now about the way we might want to set this up as well.
So they have a financial interest in telling you to talking about the Philadelphia project.
Right. I mean, this is, you've raised a point that is always a problem. You've got the salespeople on one side telling you one thing, and then when you get around to actually doing the project, you have the underwriters telling you something else. So you have to be careful when you do this. You have to have your own owner's representative that's, on the engineering side, that's helping you understand the project, and you need lawyers to help you make sure that you protected yourself. But at the end of the day, they, if they can't provide a project that is cost effective, then you don't want to do it. And they've done it in Philadelphia, apparently. We'll try to get information on that for you. And there's another one that's going on right now in Montgomery County in Maryland that's a new one. So Ollie's right. There has been more of these in the last couple of years than, I just haven't done a survey on this for several years now.
I just want to reiterate that we're going to bring projects back to you. So before we go to contract with anyone, the council is going to say yay or nay, and you're either going to say, yeah, we think we've got protections, or we don't have protections. And we can't move forward with any projects until you guys say yes or no to. I would, I'd like to keep the legislation the way it is, because I think it gives us the legal authority to move forward. But then when we move forward with individual projects, council will have the ability to say that makes sense or that doesn't make sense, or we need more indemnification. We will write the contracts, the RFPs, right, to fully indemnify the county as much as possible. And I don't know all the issues around fully indemnification. I don't know this area of law, to be honest with you. But those are things why we are going to need good attorneys and a good law department to help us figure that out, so that we write into those contracts as much protection as possible for Cuyahoga County.
Andrew, you said you spoke, or you think it would be a good idea to talk to the underwriters in Philadelphia. Has anyone spoken to the underwriters in Philadelphia?
Well, Amoresco underwrote it. So we've been talking to that company about what they put together there. So I guess in that regard, yes, we have talked to them.
Okay. I guess I thought you meant that underwriters, that there's probably highly likely there's an insurance underwriter someplace under that, behind that, also a Lloyd's of London or something like that, that would have been, I think, important to talk to them about what they see as the risks too.
Yeah, that wasn't what I intended by that. I didn't mean that type of underwriter, but I just mean underwriting the risk of the investment.
Okay.
But,
Do we know if there's been any operational, and how long have these been running in Philadelphia and Brooklyn? These, and now Montgomery?
At least 3 years.
Okay.
So it's probably about 5 years, I would guess.
Are we aware of any lawsuits or anything by any complaints or clients that have used these products?
I am not aware of any lawsuits that have been brought on those.
Okay. Have you done any search? Has anybody looked into that?
I have not.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Brown.
Thank you. I guess the only thing that really gives me real pause is that Director Foley, you keep saying you think that we have the legal authority. And if, I mean, and given the number of lawsuits we have experienced, I don't know, does this open us up for potential lawsuits? That's my trepidation and hesitancy here.
Mr. Chairman, this is Greg. If I may, we in the law department are very confident we have the legal authority to do this. The Constitution gives the county the authority when it adopts a charter to adopt all the powers of a municipality. The Constitution and the state laws of Ohio give municipalities the authority to develop utility. So we therefore have the authority to develop a utility like this. Now, but that doesn't mean somebody isn't going to come up and say, we're wrong. That's impossible for me to ever say anything like that. So we are very confident. We've seen an opinion from the Legislative Service in Columbus that we have the authority to do this, but nobody can give us 100% guarantee.
And then finally, the 2 to 3 examples that currently exist, are those counties? 2 to 3 in Philadelphia, is that a county utility? Is that what we're saying? No?
No.
Okay. I just needed to clarification. I thought that was the case, but just wanted to clarify. Okay, thank you.
I should also clarify too that we have microgrids in Ohio as well that are currently being operated by AEP Ohio. These are very small microgrids, but they are microgrids that relate to battery and solar systems. And that's one that has been specifically targeted. That sort of system has been specifically targeted by the Department of Energy is supporting. But the problem with those types of microgrids is and the reason we don't have more of them is because you have to go to the PUCO to get specific authority to do that. And then the costs of it are distributed and socialized among the entire ratepayer base. And so they're actually putting in 10 of these in front of the meter microgrids like that currently AEP Ohio is. And but there's just, the reason why we want to do this through the municipal or through the county utility is that we don't have to go through that process of getting approval from the Public Utility Commission. We are able to put together a proposal and get approval, internally with the city or the county council is our approval process. And then, we're able to move quickly on it. And then in the event some of these grants come down that are going to be, the 400 million in clean or 400 billion in clean energy and the 200 billion on infrastructure and another 200 billion on broadband, all that stuff starts coming down, we'll be in a position that we can move pretty quickly on all that without having to go through this process of PUCO approval that prevents First Energy and AEP and anybody else in the state other than the municipal utilities from being able to rapidly move forward on that sort of thing. So I'm not sure if that helped or not, but I didn't want to leave the impression that these are rare. These are becoming more and more common. It's just what we're trying to do is a little bit different because of the in front of the meter aspect of it that is, that we're trying to put together that is really we're in a position to do that the investor-owned utilities can't do.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask a question, if if there's an opening.
Councilman Brown, have you finished your questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I think I saw Councilman Baker.
Yes, thank you.
Right.
I'm listening to all of this, and I would have to agree that I think we should include an amendment that releases us from any liability when we send out this RFP. I think the words from Mr. Weiss, who said that we need to pass this resolution so that those developers feel the county is behind it. Otherwise, it takes a lot for them to get their resources together and their teams together and the paperwork together in order to submit. They won't do that unless they think the county's behind it. So, I mean, that's a pretty serious step that we're taking to trigger to those developers that, yes, you submit, we're behind it, and we're a go. And I do think that if we're going to go that far, and if it's that important that we need to approve this legislation before they will take us seriously, then we should also put a serious disclaimer on there that says clearly that we do not hold any liability. I just think that that's prudent for us to do that, and we don't have to go any farther than that, but it sends a message that we welcome you, but we also welcome that you take on what needs to be taken on without the county's ability to pay if something goes wrong.
Mr. President, Mike Wise again.
Yes, Mr. Weiss.
Thank you, Councilwoman Baker. I would just say, indemnity is, and I know we have a lot of lawyers on this call. As a developer, I'm never going to agree to indemnify the county for its own wrongful acts. So if the intent behind this discussion is to provide some sort of immunity, blanket immunity for the county, no developer is going to sign up to provide that. You would typically see in the agreement, the development agreement between the county and the developer, an indemnity provision where we agree, the developer agrees to indemnify the county to the extent that our wrongful acts are being attributed to the county, where it's suffering exposure due to our wrongful acts. So, you have your law director on the call, and I was hesitant to say anything because, I mean, obviously you have your own law director, and I'm giving you my 2 cents on an indemnity provision, but I think it would be difficult, I think, to craft an indemnity provision in an enabling resolution like this. Councilman Baker, you're a former legislator. I am. Councilman Miller, Councilman Sweeney. I'm sorry, I'm missing a former legislator on this call, but I think I don't recall seeing indemnity provisions in enabling legislation. I think they're inherently complicated and difficult to put in legislation.
Mr. Chairman, this is Greg, if I may. That's the point I was trying to make earlier. I mean, is that what we're talking about here is a contract provision. Indemnity is a contract provision. It's not a provision that goes into this type of legislation. And as Mr. Foley said, the contracts all have to come back here. So this is a question that gets asked when the contracts come to council.
That's what I tried to say.
For their approval. So, yes, I am mimicking what Councilwoman Simon said earlier.
Sorry, I didn't know I was not unmoved. I said, that's what I was trying to say too. Or I did say.
Mr. President.
Further comments, questions? Anyone else want to weigh in?
Mr. President.
Councilman Gallagher.
Having not been a legislator, and I guess that qualifies some people more than others here, I could easily put an indemnification clause in this legislation right now. So it's not very difficult to do. And I would imagine anybody who went to law school could do that. But here's the real question: is the legal minds that are going to be driving this is the prosecutor's office. Where are they?
Mr. President, I don't
Actually,
think the prosecutors are the legal minds who are going to be driving this. We're going to RFP out to lawyers who are experts in the field. So the prosecutors are not.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What's the price tag on this to get all these experts and lawyers? What's the price tag on that? And I'll ask that to be a solid number that you'll stand by with your job on the line. What's the number?
Councilman, we gave it to you last time, and I'll send it over to you again. So we're going to need someone who administrates this from in utilities, in public works. We're going to need some accounting assistance through our fiscal office. We'd like to have someone on staff who's going to be helping to coordinate new potential projects, new microgrid projects. So I'll put together a number for you and send that over to you. And then we're going to need assistance with lawyering and engineering assistance, and probably like kind of an owner's rep. And I think my take on that is that's kind of going to cost us, $300,000 to $400,000 for that tranche of expertise. But I want to remind you is that we get that money back through the developer. So those are pre-development costs that we get back through the sale of power. When the developer goes out and develops it, they're paying us back for those costs.
Well, thank you for that, but it doesn't seem to be a hard number. And I know that's difficult to do because there's a lot of moving parts here. But it just seems to me that there are some holes in this that should be filled. There should be some sort of protection for the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County. I don't see that. You can move forward, I understand, and create this utility, but I'm just wondering, are we ready to go? You don't know the true dollar figure and all this. You're telling me we're going to get our money back, which is good. I mean, that leaves us at zero. My only concern going forward is you, for instance, bring in a huge company that relies on this energy. It goes down through no fault of our own. And not talking whether it's Cuyahoga County's fault, because we're going to be indemnified. That developer is going to pay those costs for that organization who lost a day or two of valuable information regarding, the shutdown. And no one can tell me it won't happen. I mean, things do happen. That's the only concern I have is that if we are indemnified, we don't have anything to worry about. Then you got me. But right now I don't have that. And I really see an interesting dance around putting an indemnification in this legislation. It's quite interesting. Thank you.
Chairman, Mr. President.
Well, I hear, let me ask one question. I hear in your comments that we are, a lot of our questions around the contract and all those specifics, that they will be answered more when you have the authority and you're able to put out that RFP. So my question is one of our prepared questions that we gave you. Tell us a little bit how you will select those engineering and technical consultants that are going to help you draft this RFP that you put out there. Tell us about that process. How will you select these individuals?
Yeah, so Councilman, we're going to need some help, as I suggested and you suggested. So we would do an RFP for electrical consultant to help us write the RFP. We're going to need probably an owner's rep at some point who's going to be representing us in ongoing, discussions and negotiations once we pick a developer. and we're going to need some legal assistance up front. So we would do RFPs to hire people to help us write those RFPs and evaluate the RFPs. And the goal would be, 2 to 3 months, we would have an RFP out in the street and be able to choose someone, 2 to 3 months after the legislation is passed, to help us start working on the RFP to hire the developer.
Okay, so you're going to have an RFP to help you create the RFP.
An RFP for the RFP, correct?
Okay.
And I do want to say that there's been a lot of interest in this. So people think there's, cool idea. People have said, hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to put something out for this? And how can we bid on it? So I've got a lot of calls and emails about, how do we get involved? So, but we would make it a public process, do an RFP to hire someone to help, who's going to help us run this, put this all together.
I want to come back just to an earlier question I heard about the potential for lawsuit. Obviously, there's First Energy, they're the provider, they have done it, and this is their world, and maybe from their perspective, maybe they're litigious. Can you speak to that environment? Is it something that we might do that might cause a lawsuit? Is it just the nature of, are we stepping into a world where we might find ourselves just in a litigious environment? Just speak to what you see around lawsuits and their potential and where they would come from.
Councilman President, look, I can't predict what they're going to do, right? They are a litigious organization and they file a lot of lawsuits. They're also in a big problem. They've got a big mess on their hands at the moment. So they've got a whole bunch of lawsuits that are they're reacting to. They've publicly stated they're not putting any more money into political work. They've pulled back from, supporting candidates or supporting, 501c4 organizations. So I can't, I just, I don't know what they're going to do or what they'll do in the future, other than I know that they've got a whole bunch of problems on their own hands that they have to react to and deal with. And I think that publicity that they've suffered over the last year or so is not their friend. And I, while this is a potential, I don't know, they're not probably happy to see us doing it. They also don't offer this product, right? So they don't offer microgrids in our region. We would have the ability to do that. So I they're creative and they may file lawsuits, but I just don't want to predict it.
All right, any other questions or comments?
Mr. President?
Councilman Strawn.
Yes, and I know that we were told that we had an expert at the very beginning of the ERP, and we know where that went. We had supposedly somebody who had run multiple projects in the past, and we know where that went to and where it's going.
No, we didn't.
Oh, we didn't know where we went to? Well, we know where it's gone. How about, well, beginning that he was going to take us down a bad path. Where we are at this point with this project, Weiss gave us his 2 cents worth, and we appreciate that. It didn't seem like it was all that difficult for him to give us a 30,000 foot section that would be able to cover indemnity with the exception of willful or actions on our own part. And so I don't understand why that would be so resistant to add that at this point in time to give, everybody always wants to have a completely open and clean process for anybody to look at. What is the harm in saying that we intend that when this is over with, we're going to expect you to indemnify us for all risks with the exception of something we might have done intentionally on our own part.
Mr. President?
I don't understand why that's so difficult. If Mike Weiss could put those words together in 15, 20 words or 50 words, we're not asking to draw up the legal contract, Mr. Huth. We're just asking you to put together a very mini version of just giving that expectation at that level. It's certainly, if I'm the contractor that Mr. Weiss pointed out, is going to go through a lot of time and a lot of trouble, a lot of expectation, hours and hours of hiring experts, and only to find out at the 11th hour that, oh, gee, I thought the county was going to still be my backstop. Should we have a power drop similar to what happened at UH, why wouldn't we want it to be open and free with that information?
Can I make a quick comment? There's been a number of commentaries about the situation at UH. It should be made clear that there was no liability of the utility company for any of the issues at UH. That the utility company is actually completely indemnified against power loss. So anything that we do around resiliency associated with the county would be contractual. If we and the developer, and more particularly the developer, chose to offer a service level agreement around resiliency like NG did with Ohio State. So I just want to make that clarification. That's been brought up a number of times. And again, there was no liability to CPP, there was no liability to First Energy or whoever the utility provider was in that instance. And I'm not aware of any cases, unless it was a willful negligence, where the utility company was held liable for a power outage.
And those utility companies are providing and promising 99.99% uptime?
Well, what you put in a contract, and again, we have not written that contract to provide what that service level agreement and what the details around that figure are going to be. So, we are contemplating a high uptime, resilient offering through the creation of a microgrid. The construction details and working with the developer will lead to a service level agreement that could have contractual clauses in it around clawback from the customer to the developer. And that would be how it would be handled. But again, pretty clear that the utility provider, which is the role that the county would be playing in that tripartite contract, would never carry liability for that specific type of liability.
And why not put it in writing?
I think that this broad definition of liability is impossible to put into writing to cover all potential cases that the county municipal utility might play in. For example, the municipal utility could enter into something completely different in 5 or 10 years down the road. An example that we've been talking about is perhaps we want to create a very small scale project around electric vehicle charging stations. They may not go through a developer. They may come through grant funding from the federal government or from Volkswagen money or Audi money, and that those might be deployed, in which case this conversation around liability may be a completely different ball of wax. So I think when we, understandably, the proposed legislation is extremely vague and light, and I think that's because we can't possibly fathom all of the potential opportunities that may be. And as Mike and other folks have said, I think when the rubber hits the road on a real contract, that these types of questions definitely need to be gone into in depth in this group with the appropriate legal minds on the phone and the contractual obligations clearly defined and delineated.
Mr. President, I would be happy to have, if you would hold this so we could at least have legal put together some language, and if it gets voted up or down as an amendment, so be it. But I see no harm. We've gone this many years without a microgrid in the county, so another 2 weeks is not going to be offensive to getting this thing put in play.
Mr. President, if I can respond.
Councilwoman Simon?
I in no way am going to support an amendment that will be a poison pill for us to move forward. And in fact, that's what it does. Any legislation, and we've done this, and council colleagues know, in enabling legislation, we do not handcuff our ability even to take a step forward. It makes no sense. It's a killer of this legislation, so it doesn't succeed. That's all that's going on here. When we talk about protection of taxpayers, indemnification, that goes to the contracts. Every contract is different. You don't just put it in legislation to thwart. Ali said it. We can't even contemplate all the opportunities that are going to be before us, and to set us up to fail is exactly what this amendment is about. And I hope my colleagues can see through this, that every other legislation enabling we pass, we have different contracts that we look at and scrutinize. Why would we stop doing that now? Because it's going to thwart developers and opportunities to come in, and that makes no sense. In no way am I going to support a stalling of this for an amendment that's going to kill the bill. And I hope my colleagues are aware that that's what's going on here. It's a poison pill. It's not orthodox, that anything from the past, how we've operated. And you know what? And anytime it comes to climate change, anytime it comes to environmental advancement, sustainability, we have to stop. We have to, look at things and make, how are we going to stop it? It's not right, and it's not good for the county. And when I hear we're not protecting taxpayers, I want anybody who's listening to understand that that's at the contractual level. That's not at the enabling level. And you know what? Let's move this forward. And if somebody wants to introduce the legislation to amend it later, to handcuff us, we can talk about that later. But we need to move on as a future county that's taking a leadership, and instead of going backwards, which is what we're doing, we're killing a bill. So, Mr. President, I ask that we move forward. I'm a co-sponsor, and if they want to come back later and stop a contract, let them do it. That's the time, not now.
Mr. President.
Councilman Miller.
Thank you. I agree that the place to deal with indemnification is in the individual contract and not in broad enabling legislation. Each of the contracts is going to be different, and we could not anticipate all the different kinds of provisions that we would need in a piece of legislation like this. So I would not support the amendment that's being talked about. And I'm going to make a motion that we move this resolution to the full council on second reading. And so this will give us some time. And if anybody wants to put forward an amendment, it can be put together. It can be put forward at the council meeting at second reading, but I think we should take the first step and move it forward. So that's my motion.
And I'll second that. Thank
We have
you.
a motion on the floor and a second. So now discussion. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. President, if I may, Nan Baker. So it sounds, if I may, so it sounds like there are opportunities when we will accept liability, and there are opportunities where we won't. And it all depends on who we're contracting with, perhaps how large they are, what their attorney base is, and issues that perhaps we will just not have the legal ability to get what we wanted to get to begin with. I mean, it sounds like we're leaving the door open because contracts are different, and we will take liability in places where perhaps we don't want to, but we will in order to get the developer to come. And I don't see how there's a downside when Mr. Foley says there are companies out there waiting, that there's a positive reaction to this, that they're waiting for this to get on the books and have a chance to bid on it. So if there's that much enthusiasm, I don't think we should mislead them in thinking that we are entering into this so that there is no risk to the county if something should go wrong. And anything less than that, I think, is not being upfront with these developers who come and spend an awful lot of time, as Mr. Weiss said, would be needed to put together a team and do all the work that it's going to take to bid this. And being upfront with them, if they really want this and really want to come, then they will accept those terms. And it's either a great opportunity for them or it isn't. And if the liability is too great, then they won't do it. And that's, I think the amendment is important to also protect those taxpayers so that we're not entering into something that we later find out is more than what we can afford to do.
Thank you, Councilman.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Councilwoman Simon, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I understand the concern, and certainly I don't expect that these developers are freshmen in high school who are coming in without any idea about what contracts are about and what an entity would expect when entering into a contract. So we would not be misleading them. They're advanced experts in the field, and I'm sure they've been around the block before. So it's a free market, and I don't think the council should be in a position to, be protecting developers from what might be expected from the county when we want to entertain a contract with them.
President?
Did I see another hand?
Yes.
Right here, Councilman.
I think the proper place for this is to remain here in the committee of the whole. It's not to vote this out today. It's premature. We haven't even spoken to the folks in Philadelphia or in Brooklyn to find out exactly what steps were taken in those procedures and those activities. So I think it would give us an excellent opportunity to bring them before us, ask them to talk about it. You've got this list of folks who are expressing interest, Mr. Foley. What better place than right here in this public forum to have these conversations, to get their input and get their thoughts out there so we can hear what levels of enthusiasm. We're hearing it only from one side. I would love to hear from them, and I'd love to get the backgrounds as far as what these indemnifications, these clauses, these conditions that perhaps Philadelphia did or did not ask for, Brooklyn did or did not ask for. Based on my at least hearing of this, Philadelphia is not a county unless it's a county of the entire county of Philadelphia. I don't think it is, and Brooklyn is not certainly a county in New York. So are we the only county looking to do this? Let me get right down to the numbers.
You want me to answer that? As far as I know, yes. I mean, counties typically do not have legal authority to do this. It's one of the unique opportunities we have with our county charter and and the Constitution as it's set up in the state of Ohio. So
we're the only county in the entire United States that has the authority to do this, other than perhaps some.
And I'm not going to pretend to tell you that how every county is set, or how every state is set up, but my understanding, right, is that mostly cities have this authority. So municipal utilities are set up, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of municipal utilities across the country.
To Ms. Simon's point that we would be first then as a county, unless I haven't heard any county, unless Montgomery is a county that we just heard about. So we might be the second. So this is the proper place to keep this legislation, Mr. President, until we get keep going more and more information. I will not be supporting the motion to bring it up.
Comments from
it's in this committee right now. This is where it needs to stay. It is in the committee of the whole. This is where we get work done. It doesn't get work done on the floor.
Are there any comments from my colleagues? Any further comments?
Mr. President.
Councilman Gallagher.
My point of indemnification is not to place a poison pill in legislation, especially when I'm not a sponsor. So that for that to be suggested, I take great offense to that. But it goes a long way in telling me that those that do support this are evidently concerned about a poison pill of some sort indemnifying the county. Ergo, the taxpayers of anything that's going to come on down the pike. How we could just walk away from, just take the responsibility for some outside source providing this service is beyond me. Now, maybe there are, and we can look at other contracts and find out more. I haven't seen it. We have a bunch of people here that evidently we started out with 2 or 3 of these, and now there's thousands of them. It was testified earlier. Let's get a couple examples of what they did and how they did it and what their success rate has been. I just quickly looked up the Philadelphia project or the Brooklyn project. The only thing I can get on that is to 2019, where they still hadn't started yet. So I don't know where we're at with this, but to suggest indemnification of the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County is a poison pill in any legislation goes a long way in telling me where I'm going to end up voting. Thank you.
Mr. President, I think we know how you're voting, Mr. Gallagher, but despite that, you heard what I said. This isn't the place to stick in handcuffing provisions. It's when we can have this discussion when we get presented with the contracts. This isn't the time, and we all know better than that. This is to kill the deal.
Again, I take great offense to that, and you don't know how I'm going to vote, and how dare you?
All right.
You
Okay.
just said how you were going to vote.
No, I said, you're not going to get me if we don't have indemnification. We don't have it.
It's a catch-22.
This is in committee. This is a debate. This isn't to throw mud. I'm not throwing mud, and I'm not telling you how you're going to vote. So don't you tell me how I'm going to vote.
Okay. You just said you weren't going to go with this vote if we
Without
didn't put
indemnification. And Mr.
Right.
Sean's completely right. You know it. You don't want to go forward because indemnification evidently scares the bejesus out of everybody.
Indemnification is supposed to be negotiated with a contract, not at the beginning. And
And
there's
if we
other options.
And if we put it in the legislation, wouldn't it be wise to do that up front? So when they are writing contracts, it definitely doesn't fall off the table?
Nope. Every case is different.
So let
Every
let this case be different.
Every contract is different.
So let this one be different.
No, because it
Okay,
will
thank you.
kill. Okay, Mr. President, we know what the issues are.
We hear you. We hear all of your comments, and I thank you, all of my colleagues, for all of your comments and weighing in. It's important to hear all sides and flesh this thing out. I'll say this. I think this is an exciting opportunity. It certainly is. It is new. Obviously, we've never done it before. We're hearing 2 or 3 in the country, unique to what we're doing, and there are still questions, still unanswered questions by many. And I'm one. I have questions myself still. But I do support the overall opportunity for this. Okay, so the next question is, where do we go from here? How do we move forward? You said earlier, Mike, that that you don't need legislation, and we've learned that we don't have to have it, but those vendors would not respond favorably if we did not move this legislation forward. This certainly gives a sign to those potential vendors that the county is serious, and it would help with them to weigh in if we move forward. Hopefully I gave that back to you accurately. You also added that there is an RFP that needs to go before the RFP that may not have the same weight. That RFP may be one where we get some of these answers, some of these questions answered, because that RFP is the one that will help us craft our perspective, our needs, the concerns around the indemnification, and have professionals weigh in on the conversation that we're having now. Okay. Can you respond to that thought?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. So no one's going to respond to an RFP if they don't know that we have the legal authority to issue the RFP and do the utility work, right? So we need this implementing legislation in order for us to even move forward going forward. So and then, as you say, the RFP to develop the RFPs will help us craft the language that guarantees that the county is indemnified when we issue the RFP for the ultimate developer in December, right? So I want to say this, we're not opposed to putting in language into the RFP that says that the county will be indemnified. But I do want to, I agree with Councilman Miller or Councilman Simon later on, and what Ali said, there may be other opportunities out there that this utility is able to engage in. Maybe it's around electric vehicle electrification. Maybe it's around broadband. You know, having, I don't know if poison pill is the right word or not, but having that indemnification in the implementing portion of the legislation, I think is problematic right now, and I don't think we need it to start off with. So I'm telling you that we are willing, when we do the RFPs out, we will create language that says that the county will be indemnified to our satisfaction, to your satisfaction, to the county council's satisfaction. I would have hoped that we wouldn't move forward with putting it into the implementing legislation.
Did I see it?
President,
Councilman Baker.
just real quick, I agree with Councilman Tron that this is not ready for prime time. I don't think we should take it out of committee. I think there are unanswered questions that need to be still debated. I think there's others that could come into this committee and give us some reassurance. But let's hear some of that interest that we're talking about. Let's hear from some of those other microgrid companies that are now in business. I don't see where that can hurt. There's no urgency right now to this. We should take our time. It is new. It's new to all of us. I've learned a lot about it that I didn't even know what a microgrid was before we started the conversations about this not long ago. So I do think that we should do our due diligence and make sure that we all are on the same page of understanding what others are doing and know what we're getting into before we start sending out RFPs.
Mr. Foley, that first RFP, is that something that you can move forward with now, even as this discussion is going on? Can't you move forward with that first RFP?
To hire someone to help us develop the RFPs
Correct.
without the implementing legislation?
Without the implementing legislation.
I think we have to go through you for that for that permission, because it'll be contracts that'll probably have to come to council. But yes,
I believe the answer is yes. I just want to hear from you.
Yes.
You have a comfort level with doing that in the context of everything we said about the second RFP. Do we have any other comments? If not, what I want to do is hold it in committee for one more week, but I do want you to move forward. I want you to start the first RFP. That will give us time to have conversation, and we can continue to move forward as you prepare the RFP that will, again, guide us and actually give us more answers that were questions that were brought today. So we're going to hold in committee, and we will reschedule for a week, 1 week away.
Mr. President,
Yes, go right ahead, Councilwoman.
we have another committee of the whole next week, so would it be on the same day?
The staff is at this moment calculating our schedule for us. So let's give them a moment to do that.
Mr. President,
Go right ahead, Councilwoman.
conceptually, I like the microgrid concept, but we as a council have not heard from any operators. And so in the week that we have, can we get staff to commit to provide us with 1 or 2 operators to talk to us? Because clearly this is something that's important to all of us. I would love to be an innovator in the sustainability world, but I want to make sure that I've heard from people who've done this before.
Mr. President, I agree with Ms. Stevens because that's exactly what I'm asking. We have not heard from one person who is not intimately involved with this project. We want to hear it from third parties, outside people, people who've run with these, people who've had failures, people who've had successes, because I'm not adverse to the idea. Don't misinterpret my ability to ask questions with my desire to also get answers. And I don't know that we've got, like Ms. Stevens said, we have not heard one word from third parties outside of the community that have run these things and operate them. We've heard people giving us their points of view, but not from the actual operators.
Mr. President,
Councilman Miller.
I would just mention that that Andrea told me this morning that Griffin and Strong said that they have to reschedule the meeting that we had planned for next week. So so we may be able to hold the committee of the whole at the same time that we had planned to do the other one, if that pleases the chair.
You are correct, Councilman Miller. Again, just wanted to give the staff the opportunity to schedule for us. But there is,
And also, Mr. Chair, to Councilmember Miller, I have been in contact with Griffin and Strong, and we're trying to keep the date and time that we have right now. Their representatives are going to call us back to let us know if that can happen.
our staff.
Okay, so-
time. Yes, we're giving you the
Okay,
time
fine.
to schedule for us. So we won't get into a deep discussion around the schedule time. We'll allow you to work on it and then present that to us. Okay. All right. Were there any other comments or questions?
Just a
Mr. Chair?
legal question from me.
Mr. Foley.
So if we ask a developer to come in and talk about this, are there any legal problems with them being able to bid on a potential RFP once it's issued?
Mr. President,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stevens.
so a developer that has previously developed one of these types of projects, or someone who's a potential developer?
I think either one. I mean, because the ones that have developed ones may want to develop, build and develop this one.
I'm not opposed to someone who's done it before and is willing to do it again, but they must be someone who has at least got a year of operation under their belt. We need for them to know that they've successfully got it up and running, and for a year they've had customers of some type. They've got the car, they've driven it around the block several times, and they can tell us what they would do differently and what they would absolutely do the same again, and where they're unexpected.
My concern was just being able to, would it conflict them from being able to bid on an RFP if we put one out later on?
That's a legal question.
Right.
And I'm not a member of the bar, as some of my colleagues have told me.
Yeah, Mr. President, I think
Stop
Mr.
laughing.
Foley asked for a legal opinion on that. And, I'm not going to go into all the detail of this, but we have a motion and a second, and I don't think, we could just pull legislation when there's a first and a second.
Mr. Chairman,
How,
Mr.
let
Chairman?
me just share a thought that was thrown out as far as CSU. They have a microgrid. Would they be a worthy candidate to give us some insight?
Are you talking about Cleveland State?
Right, Cleveland State.
I think you might mean Case West.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could we have more than one?
You could, but Cleveland State doesn't have one right now.
I am in error. I stand corrected.
I thought Case did.
Case does not have a microgrid either.
What was that stuff they did?
MCCO
with the solar panels beside the campus.
That's just some solar panels. That's not a
Okay. Okay.
All right. But my overall thrust, though, is that you can move forward with the first RFP. Whether you have legislation or not, nothing has stopped the process of you doing the very first RFP that will help answer many of the questions that you're hearing today. Why not?
Mr. President?
Yes, go right ahead. Mr.
Maybe, I'm wondering if it would be easier, because I don't think we want to get somebody in legal jeopardy of wanting to bid on a project they can't because they came in to talk to us. So wouldn't it be better if these folks that are presenting here give us an option of 5 or 10 companies that have done this and their clients, and we can, on our own, make those calls and discuss, what they do and how they did it, and the trials and tribulations that they went through. I don't mind doing that. It's a little extra work, but it's probably, it probably saves somebody from not being able to bid. I don't think that would be fair.
We hear the point. Only you know, this team here knows if you can bring someone in who is not a bidder, but is qualified to speak on the matter. You can let us know if that's a possibility. But alongside with that, I still say you have the authority right now to put out an RFP, regardless of what we do today. You can move forward with that first RFP that will bring in, as you said, the engineers and technical consultants necessary to draft the second RFP. So
How do you want to move forward, Mr. President?
I've already stated we will hold this legislation for 1 week, and our staff will schedule the next meeting. But at the same time, I do support this. I do have an overall support, okay? But I think we should hold for 1 week, and we can talk offline, Foley, but I do think you can move forward with that RFP, because that RFP will help shed light on some of the questions that this council has already put forward today. There's absolutely no reason why you cannot move forward. I initially thought that second RFP was the one that had to happen, but now that I know that there's a first RFP, let's move forward.
Mr. President, just a technical question, Mr. President.
Yes, go right ahead, Councilwoman.
Well, two technicalities. One, first of all, we have a first and a second on the floor. We can't just ignore that. So there has to be a procedure to withdraw if we're going to do that. But secondly, I'm not sure why, people would spend money and time on something if it's not even going to come to fruition. I'm not sure what that's going to involve, coming up with RFPs and spending money to do that. And when I don't know what that's going to involve if there's not going to be a grid or enabling legislation. That's sort of the cart before the horse. But I'm just wondering.
Mr. President,
right,
let's ask Mr. Foley what that first RFP would be.
Hold the floor.
Okay.
You are correct. There is a vote on the floor, so we will have to consider that. But it is where we are. Where is this body as we continue the discussion? And we are still in discussion with the first and the second. So with that, continue discussion, and Councilman Strawn, continue to have the floor.
Yeah, my question is, if Mr. Foley, you do think that it is important to put out the first RFP to start to gather and collect the information that the council president has suggested in the sequence. Is there any reason that would not be providing us more information to make a good, intelligent decision when you get that successful bidder of the RFP? There's no reason that they would not want on that piece of the contract. They're not going to be necessarily the service provider from the result of the first one to put together all the issues and questions and things that we need to do to structure the second RFP. Is that correct?
Well, Ali, I'm going to ask you to jump in here too. So as we develop the RFP for the RFPs, right? So for the developer, we're going to walk. So we've got ideas of like geographic areas that we want to put into this first set of RFPs. So Arizona, the potential, the Sherwin-Williams facility. Do we need to, how much detail are we going to need, Ali, do you think, or Andy, before we can hire someone to help us even structure the RFP for that developer? Am I making sense?
Yeah, so the initial RFP that's been talked about as this first RFP is for engineering and legal assistance to help develop the RFP specific to, I think we were targeting 3 specific microgrid projects. So there's technical components that need to be worked out to ensure that the RFP that goes to developers creates a fair and even platform for those developers, so we get apples to apples proposals, that we ensure that everyone's aware of the contractual terms that this conversation has spent a long time on, that talks about things like where liability is held, who is liable for what, who's bringing which money to the table, and how the whole construct will operate. So that's a pretty significant amount of work. In terms of, again, I don't know whether you have to have an approval for that, but that is funded regardless of whether any of those microgrids get built. those fees are going to need to be paid by the county. And then if the microgrid does get built, then that would be recovered from the developer recovering those costs back to the county. So that's how that would operate.
Ali, the irony of that seems to be, to me, that should be what we were first being presented with before we then authorize the creation of a utility, and then we have our steps out of sequence. Seems to me that should be what we are discussing right now, so we have better facts. Then if we choose to go forward with those facts, then we pass this legislation. And because then you have the two pieces of information to take out for the second RFP. You then have the enabling legislation, and you have effectively created what the four corners of what that RFP should look like.
Yeah, you do need both pieces. Apologies for the interruption. You do need both pieces, the enabling legislation and the RFP work that needs to be done. I think, you know, and I was a big proponent of accelerating this conversation. And the reason is, if this conversation was extremely different and the county was very much against having a utility as part of its economic development toolbox, and you had already engaged the legal and engineering talent, then there was no way for recovery of that money for the county. That would be completely sunk cost. So I think that's the risk, is that if you have no recovery mechanism because you're not going to authorize the eventual construction of a microgrid to recover these development costs, then that's the risk that the county would be taking on.
We would be hiring an expert to help us put together the four corners of this conversation to help frame it, it would seem to me. And yes, there is a risk of going out there and hiring an expert to bring that, to try and lay the four corners of that together. But that's a risk that seems to me would be putting it in the right sequence.
Well, Mr. President, I mean, in some respects, we've done that with Andy and Ali and you know, who've helped us kind of construct how this should move forward, right? So we've modeled geographic locations where we think this makes sense, and where we think that there's both customers who want to take the power and developers who want to offer the power. So you know, I think the sequence of how we've moved through this, I think, is correct. It makes it more real, right? And numbers become more real, and for developers and customers, once we've got the authorizing authority to move forward. And so that's why we're asking for that authorizing authority to move forward. I think it also helps with, if we're sending out an RFP for someone to help us construct the RFP, it also makes it a lot more real if we've already got that legislation in place. So, you know, again, I guess I would ask that we move forward as kind of the sequence we've put forward, and then the RFP for the people to help us develop becomes more concrete, I suppose, that this is going to move forward, and they can put together real numbers for constructing the RFP for the developer.
Right. Any further questions?
Yes, Mr. President, if I may, Ann Baker.
I'm sorry, I saw a hand. Chantel Brown, Councilwoman Brown.
Thank you. As we're sitting here, I know that Director Foley had expressed that there is some interest. So is there a way to have our developers submit ideas for the microgrid short of an RFP, and then that way we're not guessing, they can tell us the conditions that they want? Is that a possibility? Hello, did I freeze?
No, you're still there. Mike, I can take that one. The problem is, in the consulting world, we call that boiling the ocean. It's just a very difficult open-ended question to ask developers to look at without specifics. We did, with the Cleveland project, execute an RFQ, request for qualifications. And again, I would defer to Mike on whether he would want to do that again for this project, but it didn't go into the depth that this conversation has gone into. It did ask some questions about construct. We could ask more questions about liability, but they would be very loose responses without specific project details behind them.
it might reassure some folks, give a little bit more confidence.
Yeah.
So we also did an RFI with that as well. And so we kind of have done this already, as Mike said. We have gathered all that information as part of the downtown Cleveland microgrid project that we can point you to.
With the developers, you're saying the developers have already done that step?
Yes.
Well, I guess I would need to review that. I'm sorry.
So, okay. We can send over, we had responses from 8 developers or 11 developers and 8 who we pre-qualified. We can obviously send you over their how they thought about how they would develop the downtown microgrid. So we can send you over those responses. They're about 100 pages each, I hate to say.
Well, no, but these are, what about Brecksville? Are we talking about Brecksville location? So this was downtown versus Brecksville. So are there any differences, significant differences, would you say? I would think.
Yeah, Ali, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, there are similarities and differences. I mean, it's you know, again, I think a lot of the contractual conversation, maybe the prior responses could illuminate some of that. But technically, they're extremely different, and they're also different in terms of kind of anticipation of invested capital as well. So, you know, obviously, the more expensive something is, the change in perception around how to deal with risk and liability, right? So, you know, the downtown microgrid, we're contemplating a $100 million plus investment from the developers. Some of these other projects we're looking at least an order of magnitude less. So we might have a different outlook on the liability issues from that.
Okay.
All right.
And I actually have another.
Go right ahead.
I did want to put that on the floor, so keep me posted, I guess.
All right. Okay.
Mr. President, I just.
Go right ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you. You know, with the power of technology and Zoom, we don't have to have anyone flown in or drive in from Philadelphia. We could bring those people electronically at their at a meeting that we may set up for next week, and same with Brooklyn. So I don't think it would be difficult to get representatives from in front of the meter microgrids to really give us a firsthand accounting of what they did and how they did it and what are the downsides and what the upsides were. So just putting that out there, that it wouldn't be that difficult, I think, to invite those that we can hear from that have actually been through it, that don't have any conflict with perhaps bidding on this. And then the second thing I would offer is that I haven't heard a lot from Director Deaver, being this is going to be in Public Works. It'd be nice to hear a little bit more from him and what his support is and role is and what his experience is to work with someone that's potentially going to be hired as the Director of Public Utilities. And then also economic development. I know Director Carter is leaving us, but perhaps Mr. Hertig should also be a part of this conversation to tell us what his role in economic development is and what he's planning on doing to assist Director Foley in bringing these bids in. And I just think there's a lot of points here that we haven't had a real chance to drill down. A lot of surface talk, but not in-depth talk before we put a RFP out. And that can be done next week.
Mr. President.
Councilwoman Simon.
You know, I just have to say, you know, here's our opportunity to drive economic development. Isn't that what we've been saying we've wanted to do? We need to be leading and we need to bring jobs and we need to bring in corporations. And here's an opportunity actually to move the needle on that. I think we have the support of a lot of organizations that are pushing this. And it astounds me that, we're going to keep finding ways to, and I'm not saying everybody here, but to push this down the road when the work's been done to get us to where we are. And all we're simply doing is establishing a utility, which doesn't mean we ever even have to act on it. I understand that would be the hope, but if for some reason the developers that apply don't satisfy the terms that the council would want, then we don't move forward. But we here's a chance, and we just want to keep moving this slowly and backwards. It's just it's just astounding to me. But I don't think it's everybody, but it's just, if we keep going at examining every piece of this, we're never going to get anywhere. It's just it's sad, but it's a huge project. But all we're doing is establishing a utility. We're not approving contracts. We're not getting into the weeds. This usually isn't the time to do that. But I think a lot of due diligence has been done. But I don't know why we would start going with RFPs or anything until this is established. Like who would even come here if the council is not on board to establish a utility? I mean, if we want to wait a week or whatever we need to do to gather more information, but don't go with RFPs sending them out, because nobody's going to apply. And what if they do and then we don't form this? I mean, that makes no sense to me.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman Simon. After hearing everyone, I don't hear a majority support to move forward today. So we will hold for a week. We will have those conversations, and our staff will schedule again in the coming days within the next week to revisit this conversation. Right now, there are still too many unanswered questions, and the support's not there today. Okay, does not mean it will not happen, but it is clear from what we heard today. People have questions, concerns, and things they were like. You heard what has been said by this council. Mike, I just want you to take a moment, take that back, and let's plan to regroup and come again in a week.
Council
right.
President?
Yes.
I would recommend that we withdraw the motion that was made by Mr. Miller and seconded by Ms. Simon to have this item go forward to the full council for second reading be withdrawn.
The person who made the first, are you willing to withdraw?
Mr. President, I don't think the making of a motion requires that it be voted upon, and there's certainly not enough votes here to cut off debate. I mean, I think the motion could just be held until next week and dealt with then.
Do I take it that you're willing to withdraw the motion?
What I was saying is that I don't think the motion needs to be withdrawn, that the motion and the second can just be held in place until next week. But if as the president, you would prefer that I withdraw the motion, I'm willing to do so.
I will take that as a withdrawal. Thank you. The second, was there a second?
Yeah, I seconded it. And if we're staying in committee and we're not going anywhere, I don't know. I guess technically I have to withdraw if the first is withdrawn, but for the record, I'm doing that reluctantly.
Noted. All right.
Mr. President,
been withdrawn, first and second has been withdrawn.
Just for the record,
at this time we will have further discussion. Councilman Miller, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just for the record, my withdrawal is totally equally reluctant, and I'm only doing so recognizing reality and deferring to the chair.
Oh, all right. Again, that is noted. All right. So now at this time, Foley, do you have any final comments? Anything you'd like to share?
This half-hour discussion I want to engage in right now, if you're okay with that. No, I'm done for the day. We'll come back next. Just let us know. I'll talk to council staff, and we'll figure out what else you want us to help set up for next week, and we can work with you on that.
Okay. All right. At this time, is there any miscellaneous business? Not, if nothing
Just
else.
want to
Okay. Yes, go right ahead.
Mr. Chair, I just want to be clear, so they will not be going forward with an RFP. Everything will just hold until next week.
Here's my understanding. The law department says there is absolutely no reason why an RFP cannot be submitted by Greg Hoop today. The reality is that there would be minimal responses if there's no legislation in place when it comes to that second RFP. Okay. That was not the case for the first RFP, the one where the engineering and technical consultants that would have the ability to answer many of the questions that are here. Those consultants would be responsible for helping draft the second RFP. So nothing, and there's been no pushback around, at least tonight, and feel free to do it now if you like, around the first RFP that would answer many of our questions, bringing that professional knowledge into this discussion around drafting that RFP. So please feel free to push back on that comment, anyone. So in that, I go right ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, okay. I think that's correct, but I do want to say that I think we've had some pretty smart people working on this, including Ali and Andy and other entities that have kind of weighed in, and so the liability issue is a legal question, and I don't know that we need that before we issue the RFPs. I just want to be clear about that. Either one, I think that's a separate legal question that is going to be answered by attorneys outside of any of these RFP processes, right? And I want to commit that that we will, when we when we issue the final RFP for the developer, that we would construct it in a way so that there would be no liability coming back to the county. And so I don't know how to do that. I'm not, an attorney versed in kind of the writing the language for that, but that's the commitment we're making is that when we do that final RFP, we're protecting the county as much as possible, right? So I don't think we need to, I think it's a separate question about whether we can issue this first RFP or not. I would like, as the, person who's been working on this for 3 or 4 years, right, to kind of get this first phase done as soon as possible, which is getting the implementing legislation done. I understand you have some more questions, and we'll work with council staff on helping to analyze or answer those for you for next week. But I don't think that those should, be helpful to us. I guess you're right, Council President. We could issue an RFP for this first set of developing the larger RFP, but it'd be nice if we also had the implementing legislation that was in conjunction with that when we did that. So,
okay. So again, you are not getting a mandate
question,
today. You are not receiving a mandate today to do the first RFP. That's not what you're hearing from this body. But if you do not have the consultants in this room on this Zoom meeting today to draft the RFP, the original question early in this meeting was, how will you bring them in? Who are they? Who will you be reaching out to? Okay. That starts to answer the question. Will you start to take the steps to bring the people in who are knowledgeable enough to help you draft the type of RFP that you want this legislation to give you the gravitas to move forward with? Are there names? Who are they? When are you? That is, I think, the spirit of what you're hearing.
So are you saying, Council President, that passage of the legislation is contingent upon doing the first round of RFPs?
No, I didn't say, I'm not going to go that far. I won't go that far. What I have said is we will come back next week. Everyone has had a chance to hear everything that's been said. They will process. There will be questions answered during the week. And when we come back in the week, we will hear where we are. But for today, I have not heard a majority support to move forward. So there's no point in moving forward today if you have not gained a majority support today.
All right, I'll work with council staff and we'll help put together some stuff for next week for you. Okay.
Okay. All
Mr.
right.
Chairman, this is Greg. Can I just ask a quick technical question? Andrea, do you have what you need for the record to establish that this motion's been withdrawn?
Yes, I do, based on the recommendation of the council president.
I agree with you. That's probably the best route to go.
Thank you.
All right. If nothing else holds our attention, this meeting is adjourned.